Hi everyone, this is For the Love of Comics, and this episode is a return to an old favorite. This is Building Stories by Chris Ware, one of my absolute all-time favorite comic books for a number of reasons that I've gone into in detail in a previous video. About 3.5, almost 4 years ago, I made a video on Building Stories, and I'll link that above and in the description below. And I'd recommend you check that out if you have no idea about Chris Ware or Building Stories. In this video, I'd like to fulfill a promise that I made in that video. It's been a long time coming, but better late than never. And I said that I would make a quick video looking at all of the components of this novel in comics, or graphic novel, if you will. And that's what this video is going to be about. It's going to be a quick look through all the contents of this book, which is really a box full of comics in different formats that can be read in any order to make up different versions of the same story about the same characters. Depending on how you approach it, depending on which pieces you read in which order, you do get different pieces of not just information, but sensation and history in an order that is completely unique. I think there are millions of ways to read it. Mathematicians in the audience can let me know what the exact number is, which is out there. And that really is one of the most superb examples I have seen of someone using the interactivity of comics. Comics get a lot of their power from the fact that the reader participates so actively in the storytelling, whether it is by filling in between panels, by looking at stories in sequence, by creating their own pace, and a number of other things that are explored in this one book in a variety of formats and angles in a way that I have never seen in comics before. So what I'm going to do is just randomly pick one piece at a time and briefly talk about it without spoilers. I mean, some of these things will be visible, but honestly speaking, I don't think Chris Ware can be spoiled, really, because his comics are such an experience to read, and because of the way your eye moves across the page and the way he decides to pace out the bits of information that you're getting. Because of all of these things playing such integral roles in your experience of the story, the plot or a particular scene doesn't really spoil things. So let's dive into a quick and spoiler-free look at the 15 components that make up Building Stories. Building Stories contains 14 comics that make up the story, but I really think about it as 15 components because the cover, or should I say the box that contains all of these, is itself an artifact that counts towards the reading, I believe, of the story. Starting from the scattered approach of how do I actually read the title, B-U-I-L-D-I-N-G. There's an I over here as well, but this I-L is different. This is also the I for Illinois, where a lot of the story takes place. You've got panels from the comic. You've got little blocks and pieces of design, including imprint design. And it's the same with stories, S-T-O-R. You have the literal I instead of the letter I, and then you can go in this direction and read the E, or you can see the I closing as two juxtaposed comics panels. The density and playfulness of this book comes across from the very beginning, as in what the order of reading and which direction you want to go in is sort of up to you. This kind of thing is also there in the 4 spines that having a box affords it. You've got the word stories on one side and the second, and the word building on the other two. Depending on which way you rotate it, it could be building stories, stories building, stories Chris Ware building, etc. And the back finalizes it by giving you all of the pieces that this box contains, as well as a sort of tongue-in-cheek how to read this book approach, which really is any way you want to. But having essentially the entire story laid out to you like this is another unique way of getting a glimpse at everything in one go, something that the individual pieces will not allow you to do. I thought a little bit about how I wanted to approach this. Should I go from top to bottom, which is a random order in which I last left it? Should I go smallest to largest, thickest to thinnest? And for the most, I think I'll just keep it at completely random on what I decide to pick up. But I did want to start in a different way than I've ever started, by looking at this large cardboard piece first. I think even in my previous video, I referred to this as a playmat of sorts, something that you would lay out for a modern designer board game. But in the years since then, I've also started looking at it as a partition or a sort of backdrop, a DM screen for Dungeons and Dragons fans, something that you can place on the table and serves as a background screen. And then let's just go through this pile in whatever random order it's been sorted in. Straight away, we have a hardcover volume with a shiny gold spine. This is a heavy cardstock cover, and it's made to look like children's books. I'm not familiar with the books themselves. I know that they're called the Little Golden Books, and this is the story of our protagonist told in this hardcover, about 30-page format. This piece is titled September 23rd, 2000, but actually deals with a number of different days that come across as both a diary entry as well as a documentary. Then we have this huge poster-sized 2 pages. This is the size of a broadsheet newspaper and contains scenes that blend across time as a collage of our central character's memories. She does age across the front and the back pages, but having flashed backwards and forwards with her a couple of times, the aging of the character within these 2 pages and across these vignettes is some of the most elegant comic storytelling I've seen. Another broadsheet-sized document has several more pages, and these are not stapled together, they're just folded together like old newspapers. And this size and unwieldiness allows for Chris Ware to create some very interesting compositions and some very striking images in minimal fashion, it seems to me. No 2-page combination or even single page is actually alike or similar, yet they hold together as if it's a single unified piece, something that I find really impressive. The back of this newspaper and the front are the same huge panel and picture of trees just in the daytime and in the nighttime. And this entire piece has a daytime going into night feeling. This is a copy of the Daily Bee, which is a newspaper for bees. The material here is very different from the rest of the book, both in who it's about, Branford the bee, and the kind of humor it has. What Branford has to do with the rest of the story in this particular order remains to be seen, but there is, again, a sort of sadness and fatalism even in this newspaper for bees, something that unites all these pieces. Then we have another, I think, poster-sized piece. This time it's a single page, not a double one like we saw before. But this again contains a central portrait of our protagonist and vignettes scattered around. Because we saw the one with a child and with her daughter first, this one of her wedding and then the times surrounding it is a bit of a flashback, although we also have the usual movements in time and memory. This is a smaller piece now, and it's an accordion fold-out sort of strip, which can be, again, read depending on your preference, this side first or this side first. Both of these are vignettes of our protagonist with her daughter. This is an extremely widescreen flip book of several pages. I think this must be around 36 or 40 pages, but with a very tight grid structure that nevertheless manages to find a lot of variation in not just panel size and placement, but color and time. This piece feels most like a regular comic book, an American one at least, but it's on much heavier cardstock. And this is a story almost unrelated to our protagonist. This tells of the landlady in the house that she rents. The house is really the building of the building stories, and the landlady is one of the 4 occupants. But so far in this particular reading order, we've only seen glimpses of the building of the title. So this way through, this is our introduction really to the building through the person who owns it and who's lived over there for many years. Branford, the best bee in the world, is a little mini comic about Branford, who we saw featured in the Daily Bee. This is Branford's biography. This is his entire life story from birth to death and resurrection. Again, feeling a little distant from the protagonist and the building and the other characters in it that seem to be the central part of the story. This can serve as a sort of humorous yet pathos-filled break, or it can connect to the building in surprising ways, although they'll still be tangential. The style of the Bee stories being so similar yet markedly different from what we are seeing makes for a very curious intermission or punctuation for this story, and different readers' reactions would be part of how different readings can be. This is another Accordion fold-out, similar to the one that we saw before. This one has just the protagonist by herself at a time before she has a daughter, I think. Once again, I think readers can just loop back and forth, deciding which one is the first story and which one is the second. There isn't a given order even within this one piece. This piece over here has a title, Disconnect over here, and Repetition over here. This is, I think, magazine-sized or a little smaller than magazine-sized, but a little larger than comic book-sized, although I think it's the 32 pages of an American comic book. This is another comic book-sized pamphlet, repeating designs and motifs that we have seen before with different characters. This time, a different couple who live in the same building that our protagonist does, at least at a certain point of time. And the final piece that we're left with is this cloth-bound hardcover book, which has no other markings on its cover or spine. This is almost an exact replica, except for cover stuff, of Acme Novelty number 18 by Chris Ware, which is where this final chapter, I think, of Building Stories was published, at least as far as chronologically, because it happened in the middle of Rusty Brown, as I talked about in my Rusty Brown video. And there we have it, 14 pieces, including this backdrop, that make up one of the most complex and rewarding comics that I've ever read, Building Stories by Chris Ware. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.